So, what's in a name? Well, for one country, it's a whole saga of exploration, royalty, and the search for identity that spans centuries. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible story behind the name of the Philippines. Let's dive in.
All right, let me ask you this right off the bat. Did you know the Philippines had a bunch of different names before the one we use today? It's a fact that surprises a lot of people. The name we know now is really just the final chapter in a long history of titles for these islands.
Okay, so before we even get to the explorers and the maps, you've got to understand this. The islands weren't just a blank slate. Long before any single unifying name existed, the major island groups, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, they already had their own identities and their own names.
To get our heads around this whole journey, here's the path we're going to take. We'll kick things off in 1521 with a name dedicated to a saint. Then we'll jump to 1543 for a name honoring a prince, see how it got translated into English in the 1900s, and finally land on the name the world knows today.
This brings us to the great age of exploration. As European ships were sailing all over the globe, they weren't just charting new territories, they were renaming them, basically putting their own stamp on the world map.
And boom, 1521. This is the moment everything starts to change. The famous explorer Ferdinand Magellan, who is actually sailing for Spain, leads the very first European expedition to the islands. His arrival kicked off a brand new chapter, and with it, the first of many new names.
So the very first name Magellan gave the islands was Islas de San Lazaro. Now you might be thinking, St. Lazarus? Why that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. His ships landed there on the feast day of St. Lazarus. The name was all about the timing and their Catholic faith. But here's a little side note. While Magellan's name went into the history books, the map makers back in Spain needed something a little more practical, a kind of placeholder to just describe where these islands were. And that name was Islas del Poniente. It literally just means the Western Islands. This wasn't about saints or kings. It was purely geographical. It basically said, hey, these are the islands way out west from our territories in the Americas. Super practical.
Okay, now let's fast forward a couple of decades to 1543. Another Spanish expedition arrives, this time led by a guy named Ruy López de Villalobos. His mission was different. He was there to set up a permanent base, and that meant giving the islands a new, official, and very politically important name.
And this, right here, is the big moment. This is where the modern name is born. Villalobos named the islands Las Islas Filipinas. This was a huge political statement, an act of honoring the crown prince of Spain, who would later become the powerful King Philip II. This was the name that was truly meant to stick.
But get this, and this is a really fascinating detail. Villalobos didn't originally apply the name Filipinas to the entire archipelago. At first, it was just for the islands of Leyte and Samar. It was only as Spanish influence and control grew that the name stretched out to cover all the islands.
But wait, the story isn't over yet. After centuries of Spanish rule, a new power enters the scene, the United States. And with them, a new language and, you guessed it, a little tweak to the name. This is where we enter the modern era.
So during the American period, starting around the turn of the 20th century, the name was pretty much just translated directly into English. Las Islas Filipinas became the Philippine Islands. It was a literal translation that made it crystal clear who was in charge now.
And that brings us right up to the present day. Eventually, the name was shortened to its modern, simpler form, the Philippines. And locally, the original Spanish-derived name, Filipinas, is also officially used, which is a really cool way of connecting the nation's identity today all the way back through its long and complex history.
All right, I know that was a lot, so let's do a super quick recap. We started with the original, distinct island names. Then, in 1521, Magellan called them the Islas de San Lazaro. We had the practical map name, Islas del Poniente. The game changer was in 1543 with Villalobos's Las Islas Filipinas. That got translated by the Americans to the Philippine Islands, and finally it settled into the Philippines or Filipinas that we know today. Whew!
When you really think about it, a name is never just a name, is it? For the Philippines, it's a living record of discovery, royalty, religion, and history all rolled into one. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the story that your country's name tells?